the Russian civilization. So this is objectives 25 and 26. We'll talk about the expansion of the Russian Empire and how Russia shifts from Mongol control to a Tsar rule and how the Tsar strengthened his rule. So you can go ahead and number your notes, number 25 and 26. If you think way back to Unit 2, we talked about the rise of the Kiev Rus and how Russia was settled by the Varangians who met with the Slavics, and they settled the region of Kiev, which is in modern-day Ukraine, and Kiev is currently the capital city, so there's some remaining history and legacy there. So the Kiev Rus was located north of the Byzantine Empire. They were major trading partners. They had a friendly relationship based on trade and mutual prosperity. And you may remember back when that Kiev saw, as the Byzantines declined, it was their opportunity to rise and be the third Rome. But then they were conquered by the Mongols. Actually, not by Genghis Khan himself, but by one of his succeeding khanates. So the Mongols rule over the area that we're going to call Russia, or Kiev Rus, until 1480. And you're going to see we have near Poland and modern-day Ukraine, the region of Kiev Rus, and watch how Russia, and that's what was the earliest form of Russia, and you'll see how greatly it changes in the next couple slides. So pay special attention to the geography and cartography, which relates to maps, in the next couple slides. And we're going to watch this reminder video in class, but it is the first 5 minutes of Crash Course. So the Mongols fall to Ivan III of Moscow in 1480. He refuses to pay tribute to the Mongols, and at this point the Mongols are so weak and realize that they're overpowered and simply step down. It's not exactly a violent overthrow. And Ivan III comes from a wealthy noble family in the region, and so he claims power. He's often known as Ivan the Great, and we'll go in more to that in a moment. So Ivan III, along with his grandson, Ivan IV, established absolute rule in Russia. They became absolute monarchs as the Tsars of Russia. Ivan III is known as Ivan the Great, and Ivan IV is known as Ivan the Terrible. He was a quite interesting character, and we'll go more into that next week. So the first step that Ivan took when he took power was to consolidate his power. And to consolidate means you take the power that is spread out and bring it all into one central location. So essentially he centralized his power. And the way Ivan III was able to do this and claim power over the other boyars, or noble class, is that he had a lot of claims to legitimacy or claims to nobility. So Ivan III first claimed that he is descended from the Rurik dynasty, which came from the very origins of Russia, the Kiev Rus. So he said, back when we were the Kiev Rus, I have connections to that. Pardon me. Ivan III then, probably as a political move, married the niece of the last Byzantine emperor. And so he also claimed the legitimacy from the Byzantines. He said he was carrying on the role of the Byzantines and all their glory. Additionally, without much justification, he claimed to be a descendant of the Roman Empire. So way back when with the Caesar. Remember, we had Augustus Caesar and Julius Caesar, and all our Roman emperors are Caesars. That is their monarch name. And so Ivan III claims to be a descendant from the Roman Empire. So the Ivans end up creating the title Tsar, so it can be spelled both ways because, again, it's from Cyrillic, not the alphabet we use. So it's sometimes seen as CZAR or TSAR, and it's the Russian form of Caesar because, again, remember, the Kievs always hoped to bring back the glory of Rome and be the third Rome. And so that's why they took the name Caesar, the term, and made it Tsar for Russian. So Russian power consolidation. The Ivans asserted themselves not only as political leaders, but also leaders of the church. So remember that in the Orthodox Church, in the Byzantine Empire, they're also the political leader. So the Byzantine emperor was the leader of the church. He usually appointed a patriarch to rule the church for him, but he was the last word in church affairs. So he ruled over all aspects of the government, which is one of the ways he becomes the absolute monarch. Just as a side note, I'd like you to pay attention to the dress of the Ivan pictured here, Ivan III, sorry. Notice his hat, notice his kind of furry coat, and the style, because this next week we're going to talk about, what kind of civilization is Russia really? Is it European or is it Asian? Is there Mongol influence, etc.? And we're also going to see these styles and this culture shift. So I want you to get a good idea of the before. So Ivan III married the Byzantine. Ivan III married the Byzantine niece and said, "I am now the ruler of the Orthodox Church, as well as the Tsar of Russia." Now we see sort of a creepy looking character, and this is Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible. Again, pay attention to his wardrobe, his coat, the style, his long beard, his hat and gloves, etc. So Ivan IV was a bit of a tyrannical ruler, especially compared to his grandfather, Ivan the Great. So he executed anyone he perceived to be a threat. So any of the boyars that tried to stand up and speak out would be executed. Ivan IV would kill nobles, known as boyars, when they challenged his power. We'll go into his secret forces, but he had men dressed in all black with like dead animal heads on their horses, and they had black horses, and they were called the Oprichniki. And they would ride through the night and go and essentially make political dissidents disappear. So they were a very terrifying force that actually kind of foreshadowed the KGB from the Cold War era. So Ivan IV is also known as Ivan the Terrible. Something to note. We are going to investigate how he might have been one of the meanest men in history, or maybe the craziest, next week. So Ivan IV is a strong, Ivan III is a strong ruler. Ivan IV is a strong ruler. But when he dies, he has no heir because he actually ended up stabbing his son, his oldest son, in the face in a fit of rage. And he was fond of him, but had a very harsh temper. And so later he did feel bad about it because he left himself without an heir. He was also a very religious man, and this was seen as a sin. So after the death of Ivan IV, there's a power vacuum. And this time, especially compared to the reign of Ivan IV, is known as the time of trouble. So you can only imagine how bad it was. But it was a lot of fighting over power, and then those who were in power were very strict because their power was on such shaky ground. So here you see a painting of Ivan after he stabbed his son in a fit of rage. He actually kept like a staff that he walked with that was sharpened at the top that allowed him to kill people. And he used this on his son. So here is an image of modern day Russia. Notice how large it is. Our western, which means all the way to the left, the western coast, you see Moscow, St. Petersburg, and this is the coast over by Russia and Turkey, the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And then Russia extends all the way across, larger than China, throughout all of Asia to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, and touches down right almost to North Korea. So huge land, and then I'm about to show you what was the original Russia, the Kiev Rus. So just compare how much the cartography shifts. There it is. So there was the original civilization of Kiev Rus compared to what is today Russia. I do want to point out Siberia. A lot of this land, especially in the middle and the north, is quite cold and not very many people live there. But still, they had to conquer all this region and deal with civilizations like the Mongols to do it. So Russian expansion. that was my preview into Russian expansion. But it was under our early czars, the Ivans, that expansion started. And then it's our later rulers like Peter and Catherine the Great that really make the largest change. Okay, so you can take a second to look at this map, but you can see under Ivan the Great is the blue, how small it is. And then under Ivan the Great, he conquers the orange section up north. And then Ivan the Terrible has some fights south. And you can see almost to what is today Jordan, etc. But you can see the Ottoman Empire is hanging out there. We're going to see a lot of wars called the Crimean Wars, or several wars, called the Crimean Wars with the Ottoman Empire and Russia a bit later with Catherine the Great. So both rulers did encourage movement eastward. It was the region with the least resistance. There was Europe mostly settled again. So eastward was kind of the unknown. It was also an area immediately east of Moscow had dense forests with firs and wood. And so the Russians saw a lot of prosperity in trading these specialty furs from animals, cold weather animals with thick skins, and special kinds of wood for lumber. So notice our Russian garb, a lot of it does involve the use of fur, and still today. So here we have, take a minute to look at this image and kind of make observations. I'm interested to hear what kind of observations you've made when we meet again in class. But this is kind of a motley crew. And we'll go into them. The Asian plateau that Russia occupies is a cold and arid place. You have Siberia, then you have the steppe land, and you have a large plateau. And so there's not a lot of resources there, not a lot of trees or plants or wildlife to eat and survive on. It's not very human friendly. But the Ivans didn't really have a strong enough army to make this expansion eastward that they were hoping for. So what they decided to do was give incentives or motivation to make people move east. And so many peasants were unhappy under the Ivans' rule and under the rule of their boyars. They were essentially serfs. They were tied to the land, sort of like slaves. And so they were not very happy. And so what the Ivans said is that you could become free and you could get your own land if you were willing to fight for it. Okay, so in order for these serfs to escape the life under the boyars with harsh working conditions, long hours, there was a lot of times premature deaths or accidents that left people crippled because there were poor working conditions. The Russians are trying to industrialize and get this manufacturing that Europe has going, but they are much slower at it, and they don't have a lot of security measures in place. And so what they say is, if you want to escape this lifestyle, you can go east, but you have to fight for the land yourself. And so here's our same group. And so the peasants can go eastward, take up arms, fight whatever is out there, the animals or the nomadic civilizations, which there were. And the peasants that seem to take this challenge up and be the most willing are the Cossacks. So the Cossacks go and they spread eastward almost all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They are, as you might have noticed, they have a little bit more of Asian or like Mongolian descent in them. They're more outdoorsy type people, resourceful. Their culture is very one of toughness, etc. And so they're good candidates for this task. Today, you hear the term Cossacks to describe the native Russians who are a police force. And they're oftentimes known for their brutality. So it's kind of an interesting shift to modern day and their role in modern day Russia. But by 1689, Russia extended from modern-day Ukraine to the Pacific Ocean. So that's 8 time zones. It's a massive expansion. So here we go again, just another map. So you can see under Catherine the Great, we have the blue, and then under Peter the Great, the green, and then by 1598, we are all the way, or sorry, backwards. Catherine the Great, although she also, and this is not, it's difficult to see in the right-hand corner, but Catherine the Great sent expeditions down into the Americas, so down Alaska, and then across the Bering Strait, and then down the coast of California. So there were actually Russians in the Americas before many of Europeans made it to the west coast of the U.S. So they were big on expanding and discovering what was around them. And you see that blue of Catherine the Great, a lot of that has to do with the Crimean War, and we see south near the Caspian Sea into the Ottoman Empire. There were wars waged with the Ottoman Empire for region of Crimea, which is actually the area that Russia just took back from Ukraine. So interesting, might be a current event opportunity for extra credit, if you can draw some parallels. Okay, so on to Objective 28, which is about Russian economics. I'm actually getting ahead. This is more we're going to talk about on Tuesday, but rather than have you have a homework presentation or a lecture every night, we're just going to power on through. So you might make a new heading or maybe start a new page, number at 28, and we're going to talk about the Russian economy. So the Russian economic structure is also a social structure because it's a feudal structure. And so you might remember from feudal Europe that the feudal system was not only a social structure, but it was an economic structure and largely a political structure as well. I keep doing that. Take a look at the background. You can kind of get an idea here. These are not urban people. They are mostly rural, living in the countryside, etc. And again, notice their dress. Try to get an idea of their lifestyles. Write down some observations in your notes. So under the Ivans and beyond, we have, again, a feudal system, which means there's a serfdom where we have serfs as the largest and the lowest group social class. So peasants do not have primary ownership of land. The boyars do, and then the peasants are tied to the land they live and work on. So by 1649, serfdom is hereditary. If you're born the child of a serf, you too will be a serf. So they're not literally slaves, but they have very few rights and are illiterate. They get no education and are set to be poor their whole lives. There's no social mobility or way to move up. And 95% of the population is rural, which means about 94% of the population is illiterate and a serf. So that's a huge portion that is lower class. So the Cossacks, again, remember they're the peasant soldier explorers who went to settle new frontiers to the east, but they had to conquer the lands themselves. They don't really get recognition for doing this, but they get to keep the land that they conquer, except they're still under Russian jurisdiction and Russian rule. So just to draw some parallels, at the same time that all this is going on and what we've been talking about in Russia, I want to remind you that in Western Europe, not far away, their neighbors, we have the Renaissance, the printing press, the era of enlightenment and questioning government and giving power to the people, the ideas of we can solve scientific problems through reason and the scientific method, shift towards democratic societies with the ideas of the Enlightenment, and many technological innovations that, like the printing press, that are increasing literacy, allowing for exploration, growing the wealth of Western Europe. And they are colonizing rapidly the rest of the world and advancing their military technology as a result, growing their soldier force, growing their navy and weapons so that they can go and continue this conquest and this colonization. Again, this is Western Europe. So think about what we just talked about, and were similar things happening in Russia? Hopefully, you say to yourself, no, not at all, with 95% of the population being illiterate and serfs. So the Russian social structure. Again, before I begin, take a look at their outfits, make a few observations. What kind of culture does this make you think of? And we'll discuss this a little bit in class. But notice the stars and that like moon, half moon, kind of the gold, the long tunics, the beards, the hats. Okay, so at the top of the social structure is the Tsar, which is like the emperor, the absolute monarch. They're increasingly powerful as they consolidate their power under the Ivans, and Peter and Catherine the Great seek to gain more and more absolute authority. Then we have the and this is a hereditary position, so it's a dynasty. Notice the Ivans, and then Ivan has no successor because he killed his heir. And so then we're going to have the Romanov family, and they're going to also be a dynasty. Next in the social hierarchy are the boyars, and they own land. They're the upper class. We could use a synonym of the nobility to describe them, and they hold some power depending on the czar. The czars some gave them more authority, some gave them less. It wavered. Also, I encourage you to write this in the triangle so you kind of get an idea and can find it quickly in your notes that it's the hierarchy. Then at the bottom we have the peasants or the serfs. They're very poor, they're illiterate, and they're oppressed. But from time to time they staged rebellions, the most famous of which is the Pugachev Rebellion during the era of Catherine the Great. It was led by Pugachev in the 1770s, and it fought to end serfdom, to end taxation, sought for the liberation of the serfs and greater equality. And then Pugachev was taken, captured, and cut into pieces, basically to quarters. He was, delimbed, etc., publicly in Moscow to make an example of him. So when you think about absolute monarchies and you think about Machiavelli, consider if our Russian czars might be Machiavellian or not. So the social structure after the Ivans. After the fall of Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan IV, there's a power vacuum, again known as the Time of Troubles. And Russia's being invaded by Sweden and by Poland. So they have wars on their western front. This is going to be a pattern. It's not always the Swedish and the Polish, but it might be the Germans. Russia is frequently being invaded through Poland on their borders. So they're not only leaderless, or they lack a strong leader, but they're being invaded. So there are many claims to power by the different boyars. They rise and fall in the space of a few years, but no one's able to hold on to power. Then the Romanov family emerges after being elected by the feudal lords, and they're going to rule for the rest of the period in which there is a Roman monarch, so until the 1900s. So Michael Romanov is the first Tsar in the dynasty. And there he is. Notice his dress. I don't mean dress like a woman's dress. I mean his clothing. Again, take note, observe. And so, like the Ivans, the Romanovs continue to consolidate power. The peasants become essentially slaves. Alexis Romanov removes assemblies of nobles and gains new powers over the Russian church. So he eliminates some of that power, that checks and balances of the boyars, and then he reaffirms his power over the Russian church. If you've heard of the movie Anna Karenina, it's during the Romanov rule. And so you can kind of get an idea. They are nobility, but it's also interesting that all their names in the movie are names of Romanovs, so Alexei, Nikolai, etc. Anyways, so they consolidate power through fear also, because those who disagree with Alexis Romanov's policies were sent to Siberia. And I put a picture up of Siberia for you, but it is a freezing cold tundra region where I don't know that man is designed to live. So it's some of the coldest areas in the world where humans exist. with the help of the Kazakhs, the Romanovs extend Russia through Siberia into the Pacific Ocean. So many political criminals were sent to like labor camps in Siberia. They were exiled. It was not an appealing prospect. But also, this is the time in which they reach all the way to the Pacific Ocean and hold that land down. It's not just explorers like under Catherine. So at the same time, again, in Western Europe, one, pay attention to the dress. This isn't necessarily the dress of the time, but the Greek and Roman style Senate dress outfits. Again, we have the Enlightenment questioning the government and the government's power and giving power to the people. We have the scientific revolution saying we can use reason and come up with new ideas and discovering gravity and studying the space. We have democratic reforms giving people more rights, parliamentary governments, technological innovations, which is allowing Europe to explore the world, and colonization and military advances again. Just to reiterate and remind you that these people are neighbors and the same, juxtaposition of what's happening. So were the same things happening in Russia? No, absolutely not. Okay. So this is Western Europe in 1650. You can see that France is almost fully established as a nation state. Same with Spain and Portugal and England and Norway and Sweden. We still have some remnants of the Holy Roman Empire. You can see where Germany is. It's not quite established. And then all the city-states of Italy as the Renaissance and the fighting over with the leaders and merchants of the city-states to gain power. So, if you were in the Romanov family and you were young and charismatic and you had actually been sent as a young person to travel around Western Europe and see the effects of the Renaissance, you're leaving this area of illiteracy and going and discovering the art, the new discoveries in science, Columbian exploration and all the new goods from the Americas, the Enlightenment and these new ideas, and then you were to go back and you were to rule Russia when your father died. What would you do? What kind of decisions would you make in your rule? I want you to think about that. And with that in mind is my preview to Peter the Great. And so notice his outfit and observe how it might be different because he's going to take the throne. He's the son of Alexis Romanov. Notice his beard or lack thereof, etc. I'm going to ask for your observations about him. And so he does, as he's young, he doesn't have this big caravan with him. It's not obvious to the people of Europe or Western Europe that he is the heir to the Russian throne. He kind of travels incognito, just under wraps, as a scholar, Eastern scholar. And so he sees Western manufacturing, Western art, architecture, and it is so different from Russia at the time, and he sees the progress that's occurring in Western Europe. And so we're going to watch this clip in class on Monday. But I want you to be thinking about what changes and make some predictions, and you're also going to read Peter makes and why he